Welcome to the Texas Psychologist. I'm Dr. John Dolatorre, and here's a snippet from today's session. My concern has always been the psychologists who are the ones that are disseminating the incorrect information, or they're the ones that are.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah. With me today is one half of the infamous duo, right? Hosts of the LA Not So Confidential True Crime Forensic Psychology podcast. We have with me Dr. Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. How have you been?
I've been well, been really busy, been really, really busy over the last year and a half as I made a job transition and we were sort of wrapping up our podcast and taking a break. But it just seems like as we all know, there's just a lot going on in the world right now. And that trickles down to all of us that are working in mental health in any capacity, forensic, clinical research. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I had wanted to talk to both of you. So for my audience members that don't know, you had the kind of quintessential true crime / forensic psychology podcast, right? You and Dr. Shiloh ran it for about 8 years. I was lucky enough to be on a couple of the segments that you guys called Behind the Couch, where it was a sort of less formal, just kind of dialogue between whoever your guest was, because it wasn't always a psychologist. But it was just kind of an informal dialogue talking about whatever the topic was. But I wanted to talk to you because it really seemed like you were at the forefront of this incoming wave of psychologists, and we'll kind of just expand it a little bit, mental health professionals kind of being more in the public eye, whether it was social media or through podcasts or something like that. Yes, psychologists were always part of like true crime like that's always true, but there is a difference between a expert on a television show, which seems kind of an arm's length distance, versus the psychologist, having a podcast or having a YouTube channel where essentially you're entering into the person's home, right? And you guys were kind of at the forefront of that. And I wanted to talk to you about kind of how you saw the changes happening, but also where do you see the future coming now that, you kind of ended your run? Where do you see it happening as more individuals are starting to have podcasts and stuff like that? But I was hoping that we would start with giving us an update. It's been a year, I think, since the end of LA Not So Confidential. What's been going on with you?
It's really been just about 7 months since we decided we had started thinking about transitioning somehow within the last year and a half, as Dr. Shiloh and I both hit a point in our careers where, we're almost a decade older, and our careers that we, our primary day jobs just were getting busier and busier. And we were not expecting that. We were kind of I was thinking that I would kind of transition into oh, great, I'm going to be retiring in 4 to 5 years. So things are going to lighten up a little bit. And they didn't. They got really, really busy. And they did for Shiloh as well. And the amount of work that we put into producing each episode, and even with the producer, we had this magnificently talented producer who helped us out in so many ways. But we just put a lot of work into research and checking the research, going as deeply as we could, and then marrying that with current media and the most recent stuff that hasn't been, statistically validated yet, but there's talk about, like, this is what's happening in our field right now, right? And we're trying to marry all that together. It's just a lot of work, and it was so fulfilling, but it was time to take a break. And we were both incredibly relieved and saddened and supported wonderfully by our Patreon members and our long-term listeners. It's just phenomenal people. I can't say enough good things about the people that were our listeners for so long. And, we really took some time to repair, I think, over the first 4 months. And then we started talking about, like, well, if we were to do something in the future, would we do? And, we just kind of tossing ideas back and forth. And now, most recently, Dr. Shiloh was like, we were having a drink, and she goes, how about if we, and I was like, okay, yes, but only if it's manageable. Like, we have to have boundaries, and the boundaries for us were tough because we would say, okay, we're only going to do 50 minutes. We're just going to do a 50-minute episode. And then it would end up being 2 hours because we went and did the research like a mini dissertation, each time. So that's where we are right now. Like, we're taking a break. I am closer to retirement from my day job, as I call it. And that's actually kind of exciting for me because that will open up, in a year and a half to see, like, what's happening out there and what voices are out there. And if we feel like we have anything to offer, then we'll come back in a different form or a different format. But yeah, you're really onto something. I mean, I think the landscape has changed. The landscape certainly changed significantly from our first episode to our last. I mean, it was just a complete 180, where I think the primary focus at the beginning of all this, not necessarily for us, we just wanted to capture something that was going on because there weren't at that time any other forensic psychologists that were licensed and actually working in the field that we were working in, that was adjacent, and integrally involved in crime and law enforcement. So we wanted to take advantage of that to the best of our ability, and there was nobody else doing it. So we were able to really kind of carve out what we were going to do and what the rules were going to be and what boundaries we weren't going to cross. And one of the things that we saw shifting over the years, which was really wonderful, was this shift away from the glorification of perpetrators and more about the phenomenon underlying why these things happen and why people who may or may not have mental illness or just like severe characterological disturbances or incredibly strong tendencies towards criminogenic factors. How is our current world supporting the ability for them to act out in these ways? And we became more victim centric, and we saw that as like a real wave within the true crime community. And that was what was really cool, is seeing that, the people that were jumping in to do another kind of bloody and salacious podcast. And look, I'll be the first one to say, like, I listen to that stuff as well, especially if it's well produced. But what I saw was that the quality of the people that we were around continued to grow. And we were kind of welcomed into circles of people who I thought were creating really high quality content. So I'm interested to see where that goes in the next few years. It's certainly the fascination with human behavior and crime. It's not going to go away. It's all, the fascination's always been here, and it's not going away.
So could you tell us a little bit about, because you have somewhat of a non-traditional background to how you became a psychologist, but I was wondering if you could also kind of link that with kind of the genesis of how you and Dr. Shiloh decide in an arena that, as you just described, didn't really have someone like you guys. Like, how do you find yourself, becoming a psychologist, and then how do you find yourself becoming a podcaster? What were the through lines for those?
Yeah, it's okay. My journey is really wild, and I mean, not that it's completely unrealistic. I mean, I think that's one of the wonderful things about this career, is that many people come to it later in life. You come to psychology, or I would say the majority of people that I know have come to psychology after being in another field. Although we've mentored a lot of younger psychologists who started back to grad school or going to grad school after listening to our show. Myself, I had a really different background. I worked for a couple of decades in the entertainment industry. I myself was a performer, grew up in northern Alabama, one of the handful of male ballet dancers in Huntsville, Alabama in the 70s. And that's a that's a pretty specific niche right there. But one thing led to another, and I was really lucky, and I had a little bit of talent. I wasn't the most talented, but I had a lot of luck and a lot of privilege, actually, being a guy in a field where there were no guys and they needed guys. And I got a scholarship to this school, and then a scholarship to that school, and a scholarship with a dance company, and an offer to join after I graduated from college. And I was kind of off. That was my young adulthood, performing for about 10 years, and national tours, international tours, television, movies, nothing enormous, a couple of like movies and lots of commercials that were very lucrative at the time. And then, the life of a performer is tough enough, but the life of a dancer is really short. And you have to make plans for what you're going to do next, what is going to be the next chapter in your life. And I was a good teacher. I was a really good teacher, but I didn't like to teach. And I loved choreographing, and I was a really terrible choreographer. So I was not going to go into something that I wasn't good at, but I also wasn't going to do something that I was good at that I was not going to have a real sense of purpose and happiness. And what I started doing was transitioning into other areas within entertainment. I went and worked at William Morris Agency, which is now merged with another big talent agency. At the time, it was one of the big three agencies in the world. And I worked as an agent's assistant there for a year. And then I fell into this wonderful opportunity to work for a casting director, and then became a casting assistant, a casting associate, and then a casting director on a couple of my own very small shows for NBC Saturday morning television back in the 90s. And that was really cool, but it was sort of like there was still this part of me like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do when I grow up? And I ended up starting a management company. And then I think this is kind of uniquely related to being in mental health. Is like I had worked with so many actors, and I just saw that like there was such potential in so many people, and they just didn't have the right management. They didn't have people who believed in them. So I went into that thinking that it would be a really easy thing to do, to be there for these people and be able to sell them in a really authentic way. And I was completely unprepared for the realities of the business in doing that. Like there was no necessarily, all the foundations I had laid as a casting director did not translate into being a manager, despite how gifted and talented my actors were. And so after about a year, I noped out of that, sadly, and said goodbye to, the people I'd been representing, made sure they had connections. And I fell into a job in post-production. And this was like a really cool thing. This is where my nerd comes out. But I had one of these moments where, I thought, how did I get to be this age with this education and this great experience? And, here I am, like, I've got to start over again in a way. I got to figure it out. And out of the blue, a really good friend of mine called me and said, hey, one of my coworkers just had a nervous breakdown and walked off the job, and we think he's at the hospital. Can you come work for us? And I was like, and I was like, yeah, I can be there. And the office was like 5 blocks away. And like, I can be there in 15 minutes. Because don't you want to know what it is? I don't care what it is. I need a job. And it ended up being a post-production facility that at the time was doing DVD content for major motion pictures. Didn't even know what projects they were working on. Walked in, and it was a company that was doing all of the additional materials and documentaries for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Fellowship, Two Towers, Return of the King, which is something I'm like, I can't believe I'm working on these movies. This is amazing. So for 2 years, I taught myself how to do something that I didn't realize was actually a big career. I was doing acquisitions, and then I was taught how to produce segments, and it was really fun. But I had this really great mentor who said, you're really good at this, but this is all going away. So if you're looking for something that is steady and secure, it's like this is just really kind of another aspect of entertainment that is not going to offer you any guarantees. And I was like, that's great. Thank you for telling me. I'm going back to grad school. And I ended up getting accepted into a master's program, and I loved it. And I was halfway through the master's program, and I just felt like my neurons were crackling. Like there was like, I want more information. I want more education. I need more experience. So I enrolled in a doctoral program that had a forensic emphasis. And dude, I didn't even know what that was. Like, I mean, I knew what clinical psychology was. I knew what a psychologist was, but I didn't even understand that, like, no, there's another doorway here of forensics that takes you into a completely different world from what just strictly clinical work does. And I had great teachers, great professors. Like the best professors in the program really were the forensics professors, and that led to a really good education and really good training, and then right into working in corrections. Like I went into corrections going, I don't know if this is going to be the right thing for me, but it's benefits and it's a check. And again, went into this setting working in a high security men's prison here in California. And the experience was just mind blowing. The things I learned about human behavior and about the justice system, and just, it was a real awakening, but also educational. And I became a different person. Like I had always been a little thin skinned, due to my upbringing. And let me tell you, working in corrections will absolutely burn that out of you. But before I took that job, my year-long internship was kind of miraculous. I had interviewed for a forensic site that worked with pre and post incarceration sex offenders. Some that were just no contact, but had, hundreds of thousands of child sex endangerment images and videos. And I had no exposure to that, but it sounded fascinating. And I'm a Southerner, and I had a father who was blessed with the Irish gift of bullshit. I inherited that. So I've never come out of an interview that I didn't win. I mean, I have to say, like, I just did. And this wasn't where I was being interviewed by this clinical director who was the most inscrutable young woman I have ever met. Like, she terrified me because she clearly was so freaking smart and working in this really difficult area of our field. And during the interview, I said, this all sounds so fascinating, and I think this would be a really great opportunity, but I barely know anything about this area of psychology. I have my forensics classes, and I know this and this and this, but I hope I would be your a good choice. I will work really hard. And it was the first time she had kind of changed expression during the interview. And she said, Scott, that's our job. Our job is to pick the right people for this site that we then train and give a foundation and support for what they want to do with their career. And she was not lying. That was Dr. Leah Chankin, one of the best supervisors and clinical directors I've ever worked with. And Shiloh and I met the first day. We both got accepted, and our backgrounds are so completely different. She was former law enforcement from a law enforcement family. I had a little bit of military in my family history, but nothing like that. But there was just something that clicked immediately. And, there's just something about that when you meet people that are like, oh, we've been friends forever, and we will be friends forever, and that's just all there is to it. And fast forward, our families became friends. We started spending a lot of time together, and I forced her into this law enforcement psychologist position because she was getting overworked at another position a few years later. I was like, you have to come work here. Like, I didn't take that law enforcement position because I already did it with another agency. I've done law enforcement psychology. It's not, I could do it, but it's not my thing. You would be awesome at this. So she ends up being in an office 3 blocks from my office in downtown LA. And as we were walking back from lunch one day, she goes, "Okay, I have an idea." I was like, "Great. I'm usually the one with crazy ideas. What's your crazy idea?" And she says, "Okay, stay with me for a second." And this is now 9.5 years ago. She goes, "I think we should start a podcast." And I immediately said, "No, we're not starting a podcast. Like, that is like, why would we start a podcast? That's so much work." And she goes, hold on, hear me out. And she said, at the time, there was nobody else that was actually a forensic psychologist. There was a forensic psychology student who had a nice little podcast, but the person wasn't licensed, and they basically kind of read the DSM and read Wikipedia pages. That was kind of the extent of it. And by the end of the block, I had already come up with the name LA Not So Confidential, because she had convinced me to follow down her dark path. And it ended up kind of taking off really quickly. Our audience numbers were never huge, but they popped really quick. And then a friend of mine from college, who was a big fan of My Favorite Murder, which I think is another hugely successful show, and really well done, really, really well done. But I think its success lies in another area that we could kind of talk about later. But my friend from college was on a discussion board, I think on Reddit, and somebody was saying, "I just wish we knew more about why they did this." And she goes, "Oh, you should check out my buddy's podcast." And overnight, our listenership, I mean, literally overnight, our downloads tripled. And they didn't stay that high for more than about 6 months, because we were a very different kind of show. We were asking our audience to hear us in a different way. We weren't just talking about what the headline said. We were talking about, how did this person become a victim? How were they victimized? What about this perpetrator led them down this path? And some people really responded to it, and others didn't. So I mean, I'm so sorry, I feel like I've been talking forever, but that's my crazy ass story of how I ended up here in this last or next chapter of my career. I had a great time in entertainment as a performer, and I was really lucky because dancers are a lot of fun. Like, there's just a lot of fun, wickedly smart people that you would never think, these people that kind of live in the physical space of their bodies, moving through time and space, are also amazingly intelligent and empathic and emotionally intelligent. So to be this age and at this point in my life and have the opportunity to have another full career of something that I really love is just like, I'm the luckiest person in the world. I really am.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things that I think separated, your podcast from everything else that was out there, contrary to popular belief, I don't spend a lot of time watching or listening to true crime. Like, I'm on all different
Yeah.
kinds of true crime shows and stuff like that, but it's a rare thing for me to kind of spend my regular, like, my off hours doing it, because I mean, it's my job. So I prefer to listen and watch other kinds of things. But one of the things that I think really set you apart and I really appreciated was just the amount of time that you put into explaining the research.
Yeah.
And I think, from my perspective, it's relevant because in my reading of our ethical guidelines, we are responsible for educating the public. And I think when those guidelines were originally created, what that meant was your job is to kind of be the teacher. But as a forensic psychologist, I'm often, in a courtroom setting and I'm educating the judge or the jury or even other attorneys about what is going on with the individual. Like, you brought me in for a reason. Here, let me kind of use everything that I've learned to kind of educate you on how I see this, this individual. But from your perspective, do you view because you said that you're a teacher, right? Like you have that
Mhm.
kind of ability. Do you view the podcast, YouTube, do you view these things as the new wave of teaching the audience in an ethical way?
In a perfect world, it would be. I spent 9 years working, and I can, now that I'm not in that position anymore, I feel like I can be a lot more open. I had a great opportunity to work alongside in a co-responder model with the Los Angeles Police Department for many years, and that opportunity, ooh, excuse me, that opportunity gave me the ability to engage in this mental health intervention training for many years, where I got to meet a lot of cops at various points in their career and engage with them in a way that taught me how to be more particular and discerning in how I look at my role. And one of the things that I would say, and I would use this as an illustration or a metaphor, not really a metaphor, but an illustration to law enforcement is, I'd pull out my phone, I'd pick up a smartphone and say, like, this is a doorway to the sum total of known human knowledge. And what we use it for is not for that at all. We use it for communication, but now communication changes. Like, when you were a kid, like, who's calling, who's on the phone, who's on the phone? Now it's like nobody answers their phone. Like, it's this weird twist of our technology. So to get back to your point, because I'm a bit tangential, is I don't know that we can predict where it's going to go. The potential is amazing. The potential is wonderful. Like, the potential to, there are people out there that kind of grow on me, or people that I don't necessarily always agree with, but I have been taught through my training, through my academic background, to be discerning of what I'm taking in. And that's what we don't teach. And I don't believe really any society in the world teaches it. But there's less of a need in other cultures than there is America, because in the US, we glorify an onslaught of stimulation rather than an onslaught of information that we need to take apart and slowly digest. We're all kind of getting the fire hose of disinformation and information and misinformation on a daily basis. And to be frank, and this is going to be something that I hope doesn't come back to bite me in the rear, but not everybody is capable or willing to be discerning in what they're taking in. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Sometimes it's a choice, sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes there are just people that are wired to not be concerned. There are people that are wired to take things at face value. And you and I work with people like that a lot. And immediately, like, we're doing an internal dial and an internal adjustment of, like, oh, this is the plane that this person is communicating on. How do I adjust my message in order to not just educate them, but connect with them? Let's see if we can connect. And then we'll see if there's going to be an exchange of information that is cogent and reliable. But what a complex process, right? So I think that where YouTube and all of social media, there's just no control for it. Or, and this is where, and I hope I don't sound conspiracy theorist on this, I mean, it's not really conspiracy. Like, we know now the power that several corporations have to adjust algorithms or misadjust algorithms or utilize algorithms. So, are you really choosing to watch what's on your feed, or is the feed choosing what it's feeding you? And that's where I get concerned about where I have to. Oh, there was a Shiloh laughs at me all the time because I can get so twisted up in a knot about social interactions. And on Threads, there was someone that there was a health influencer that had posted absolute nonsense that studies show that exercise is just, if not more effective for depression than any SSRIs. And I responded back, that's absolutely not true. And I, in a couple of sentences, I said, yes, there are benefits and there are chemical changes. Those chemical changes are not as long lasting, and it's way more complex and nuanced than what you're saying. So then his response back was, and I have to give the guy credit that he responded back, well, I just refer to this study. And it was a study by, like in England and the NBCI. So I look it up and I go, dude, like, now I shouldn't expect somebody, maybe he's not been taught how to read research, but that's not what the study was saying. Not only was it a bad study, it was a study of other studies, right? And it wasn't saying what he thought it was saying. And, part of me wanted to kind of reach through the screen and shake his shoulders and go, you're shaming people. You're shaming people with severe depression because you're just saying that all you need to do is get off your ass and go exercise and everything's going to be glitter and pink paint. It's all going to be great. You're just lazy. You're not doing it. When we all know, I mean, we as clinicians know it's way more nuanced and way more complex than that. So I just use that as an example across the board about human behavior. And one of the things I talk a lot about that I've been really fascinated with for the last, 15 years as I've become more entrenched in true crime and commentary on that is that the Western world and particularly the US, we started off talking about the cowboy mentality of Western society that was based on a lot of things that happened in the Reformation and the Age of Enlightenment and then in the Industrial Age that sort of became what an American is. We're all cowboys. We'll pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You take care of yourself, you take care of your family, and this sort of set of ideals. And what a lot of us in the field that really are fascinated with personality disorders and the genetic underpinnings of how these things develop is that we now live in a world that glorifies narcissism to an extent. And we like the qualities and those brash, loud speaking people that throw their weight around. It doesn't matter that they're stupid or rude or mean or cruel, but look at the power that they hold. So to tie that back to where social media goes and where YouTube goes, that really concerns me because it's the loudest ones that maybe will make you pause a little bit. Like you'll stay a little bit longer on that site. Well, who's recording that? The algorithm is picking up that Dr. Scott stayed on this 3.5 seconds longer than he stayed on the cat video. So we're going to start pushing this to him. I'm somewhat aware of it, and I try to be more aware of it and curate my feed a little bit better. But there are many people that are not thinking that discreetly.
Yeah, and I think part of my concern has always been sort of intra-field issues. And what I mean by that is, so Dr. Shiloh had sent me a reel, and I'm sure you saw it too, where this mental health professional was doing a little TikTok dance or something like that. And the question was, why are you as a mental health professional trying to be an influencer? And the person's response, the person who's creating the reel, was saying, well, it's because influencers are trying to, present mental health information and obviously getting it incorrect. But my concern has always been the psychologists who are the ones that are disseminating the incorrect information, or they're the ones that are
I'm sorry.
drama.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
It's
lot of them out there.
yeah, that are, exaggerating or dramatizing information in an effort to get the clicks, right? So we talk about the algorithm, and the way that I kind of describe it to people who don't understand about what the algorithm is I say, well, you need to watch The Devil Wears Prada, right? Anne Hathaway in one scene shows up in a blue sweater, and she's laughing at, Meryl Streep, and she's looking at this, rack of clothes, and she scoffs, and she says, Anne Hathaway's character just says all this stuff about how, I make my own choice to wear this blue sweater. And Meryl Streep's character is like, no, you didn't. The color of your sweater.
That choice was made for you.
That choice was made for you.
Yeah.
And so I refer people to that scene because that tells you. I mean, it is not as dramatic as people probably think that it is. I think it is way more on point in a real world setting than I think the writer of the original story or the screenwriter was even really capable of being aware of. But as I was getting to, the concern that I have is for those of us in the field who are using this thing as a platform to become famous, manipulating the algorithm for their own purposes. And it becomes harder than for a consumer of the media to distinguish, because they could easily go, and I could name some names, not going to name any names, but they could go to a certain psychologist who at one point was maybe saying some things that were appropriate, but has since turned way to the right and has become much more extreme in his beliefs about gender identity and roles and stuff like that.
Right.
So what do you see, having seen essentially a proliferation now of mental health professionals in the podcast and social media space?
Oh God, I just want to talk to you about this for hours. No, I really do. I'm so glad you brought this up. Because that person, I don't think we need to name that person, but I want to give an example of a lovely, lovely woman that I worked with when I was at LAPD, and we were, going out into the field with detectives to follow up on threat assessment cases and working with diversion programs. And I really, really care for this woman. Very, very smart. A little bit younger than me, and she was a different discipline. She was a psychiatric social worker and one of the hardest workers I've ever worked with. And this was during a time where there was just like a lot of political. There was this was 7 years ago, and there was a lot of political strife happening. It was bad. And we were also in an environment where, look, I'm not in a mental health house. I'm in the house of the police right now. I am in your house. And so, you kept your mouth shut. I mean, there are some wonderful people. I have some wonderful friends there. There were some people there that I don't ever want to I don't want to see them again. Don't want their energy in my vibe at all. But my colleague, I kind of said something under my breath about something that was going on, and I was just kind of flabbergasted by it. And her response was, I just don't get into politics. And I turned to her and I said, mental health is politics. That is not possible to separate the two things. And then I could feel my energy rising in a not particularly productive way. And I thought, I don't think she's interested in having this conversation with me in this way. And am I speaking inappropriately, that I'm trying to press my agenda upon someone else? And, all that stuff that we do if we're good people and we're insightful and we have an emotional IQ and we're trying to figure out what's appropriate at the time. But I just realized like, oh, this is not somebody that wants to have that kind of conversation with me. That like, or they're not capable of it. And while I'm not concerned about her in particular and being one of those people because she's, not someone that would pursue social media, it really, and I got to feel here I did it again. This is what Shiloh will kick me under the table for because I got too far afield from our point. Where did we start off with that, Dr. John?
We started off with we need to be concerned about our own members of our field.
Yeah, so our own member,
algorithm.
but yeah, because we are not immune to that as well. We are not immune. I was really disheartened to find that I had colleagues in grad school that I'm not going to say they were predators. But they came into the position because they were lacking a sense of self and a sense of power, and they're going into a position where they hold all the power because there is a power differential between the clinician and the patient or the client, whatever, or the consumer, whatever term you want to use. And there are those that, there are some here in the Hollywood, West Hollywood area that you like the stories are so horrible that you go, why would you even take the risk on your license? Like your life could be ruined basically doing that. So to tie that back to the influencers, there are some that I think are amazing. Like there's an LCSW here in Los Angeles that I've never seen him before, don't know where he went to school. And I really love his take on relationships. And he's just very plain spoken and he's humorous, but he's not shaming, but he's actually funny. And I hope he stays that way. Like I really hope, like, please don't have that behavioral drift that we see in so many other fields when people become adjacent to power structures, and that even if the power structure is your own popularity and the amount of money that's coming in. There's another one that I just like. All I want to do. I'm her biggest fan. I feel like I'm almost a stalker of this woman. Is Dr. Raquel Martin. If anybody is not familiar with Dr. Raquel Martin, she's a scientist. She's a psychologist. This woman is so smart and she is so savvy about what she posts. It's like I will send it to my friends and go, you have to watch this. This person's amazing. But then there are others that will say some of the most dumbass stuff you've ever heard. And I go, how do you have a license? Why would you say that? Why would you say that? The person that you started off with, what happened to that individual? Something happened. And I mean, you probably know as much as I, like those of us that are on the inside, we know the history of what happened. Like it's talked about in our circles about like the things that happen that affect this person's thinking. And it's not just a change in culture. It's like a lot of other factors. And yet this person is still allowed a platform to speak in these horrible, horrible, marginalizing ways. I think but the thing that bothers me even more is, certainly there are those of us, there are licensed professionals in our area that it's concerning. What I'm more concerning about is the dumbing down. I mean, there's one thing, there's explaining something in terminology that is in layman's terms that a consumer can understand. Like, hey, you know what? If you're experiencing this in a series of relationships, you might want to look at this. Like, that's kind of cool. But then, and I'll use her name, but like, who is it? Mel something? What is the blonde woman?
Robbins.
Mel Robbins. Now, I'll probably I hope you don't get any hate mail. Don't, you guys listening out, do not come. He's just the messenger. I'm the asshole talking. So send your hate mail to me. Was so entranced by her and intrigued by her at the beginning. And then I listened more and more and more. And I thought, what are you doing? You are not a mental health professional. I guess you're a life coach, but the life coaches I've worked with in Los Angeles, they're a different breed. They are like educated and trained, and it's like they've taken it to an actual career that I can respect. I don't know what the hell you're doing, what money fountain you're chasing, but I just want to go, don't listen to this woman. It's like this, no, I shouldn't even say this woman, this person. The message is shaming. Instead of moving away from shame, we've got to get people to critical thinking of their own interior processes. But that's asking a lot from the general public. So I think we bear a lot of responsibility when we go into it. But
Yeah, so I'm gonna get you out of here on this question, right? So this was
great.
gonna be a little bit of a kind of a wind up for this one. So
Yeah.
I heard Noel Gallagher, right, of Oasis, say this to
Hmm.
an interviewer who had been asking him about kind of the bands that he had post Oasis breakup and before Oasis got back together, and the interviewer was really questioning some of the music choices that Noel was producing and putting out there. And he told the interviewer, the audience doesn't know what they want until I give it to them. Classic Noel Gallagher line. So, from your perspective, you had an 8-year run where you saw, kind of the field of true crime and podcasting and, mental health professionals entering into this space, kind of just building up. What do you see is the future, right? In the next 8 years, what is it that the audience doesn't know they want until they get it? And how can psychologists fill that space?
God, that is really a great question. I'm going to give you an answer that I think is somewhat aspirational. Where I think it has the potential to go and where I would really like it to go is to a space where consumers in the true crime space start to really look at the sociological factors of why crime happens and what toxically fertile soil contributes to whatever crime phenomenon are happening at the time. There's a great opportunity here for us in the mental health field as psychologists, as psychiatric social workers, anybody who really is licensed or trained really well in this area to say, hey, let's look at this. If one of the theories about this genre is that women, which is make up the bulk of the audience, are really drawn to it because it's doing something to stimulate a protective security response. Some of that I think is true. It's not fully borne out by all the research because a lot of it I think has to do with parasocial relationships. Certainly, our experience was we found out that people liked the research, but they also liked the relationship that Shiloh and I have. They could feel that it was strong, and there was something about that was attracted to them. I think that the true crime genre in media content production could be much more educational in a way that is accessible to people, but also draws boundaries. What I would love to see and what I think they can do is the media can hold the listener more accountable. Like to hold you more accountable. Hey, you're listening. You like to maybe kind of glom off what Oasis is saying is like, no, you think that you want blood and gore. What you want is security, and what that security is you want to figure out what's wrong and how it got wrong, and is there something you can do to keep it from happening to you and the people that you love. And I think that that's a great potential. That's really, really great. I had a fantastic professor at the master's level who was a sociologist, and she didn't believe in therapy. And this was a school that was producing MFTs right and left, and she's like, I don't believe in therapy. I believe in changing our society to the point where we don't need therapy anymore, which I think there's a lot to be said about that view, certainly. But yeah, that's where I think that we could go. I think that that's where we could go if we can cajole and encourage our listeners to stay with us long enough to get that, if we can form our message. But at the same time, what we're fighting is We're fighting the incredible social influence of social media and influencers that have really, I'm not really sure what the long term effects are going to be on our youth as they grow up, with shorter attention spans. But then I could also be like, I'm a boomer. I really am. I'm not boom Gen Xer cuss, but I hope I'm wrong, because I also see young people that are brilliant and funny and witty and so smart. So I'm wondering if I'm just being shown the worst of it so that I anticipate the worst. Whereas our responsibility as creators and teachers and educators is first to hold ourselves responsible and have insight and distress tolerance so that we can pass that on to the future, to the listeners who won't be, you know, begging for yet another Ted Bundy biopic. We just don't need another one. We don't need to glorify that guy. We need to talk about how the world made him and how we can prevent the world from unleashing another person like him on the public.
And that's a perfect way to end the podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. It's been really great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I hope you will have Dr. Shiloh back on her own. She can give you a completely different window on the work that we've done. And I would love for your audience to know her. She's just an amazing friend and an amazing psychologist.
Invitation, Dr. Shiloh. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.